students of class 8. I hope you are well. Today we are going to read the chapter A Visit to Cambridge from your book Honeydew. First, let's know something about our author Firdaus Kanga. Firdaus Kanga is an Indian born novelist and performer. During his childhood, he was contracted with a disease called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is also known as brittle bones disease. That means his bones are very fragile, and throughout his childhood he suffered many painful fractures which left him confined to a wheelchair. But he never let this disability dictate his life. He had written a semi-autobiographical novel which is named Trying to Grow, and later this book developed into an award-winning film called Sixth Happiness. And he not only wrote the screenplay of this movie, but he also acted in the lead role. He played the lead role in this movie. Now, this chapter is not a work of fiction, but this is actually an interview and an experience of Firdaus Kanga when he went to visit in England. There he had a meeting with Professor Stephen Hawking, the world's one of the most renowned astrophysicists, who is known for his researches on black holes and quantum mechanics and also theory of relativity. Stephen Hawking, in his 20s, he contracted a disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a degenerative neuromuscular disease. That means all his body became paralyzed throughout the time. And despite this situation, Stephen Hawking continued his work, and in the year 1974, he became the youngest fellow of the Royal Society. Later, he became the professor of gravitational physics at Cambridge, and later, after that, in the year of 1979, he was also appointed as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics in Cambridge, a post which was once held by Isaac Newton. The University of Cambridge holds an important fact in this chapter. So, what do we know about this university? This university is one of the world's oldest universities. It was established in the year 1209. This is one of the universities which has a self-governed community of scholars, and many world-class original research has always been carried out by the staff of university and the colleges under it. So obviously we can understand that in all those centuries there have been many famous alumni, many famous students that has been passed out from this university. Some famous names with which we are very familiar are like Charles Darwin, Robert Oppenheimer, Alan Turing, our own Stephen Hawking, Mario Vargas Llosa, Octavio Paz. And in the right side column, you will see some names which these persons are actually Indian. So, and they are also famous alumni of Cambridge, like Srinivasa Ramanujan, Harivansh Rai Banchan, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajiv Gandhi, Manmohan Singh, Amartya Sen. All of them have been passed out from University of Cambridge. These two are the pictures of Cambridge University. Now, let's begin the chapter. This chapter has been taken from the book by Firdaus Kanga, which is named Heaven on Wheels. And in this story, as I have already told you, Firdaus Kanga tells his experience and a brief interview with Stephen Hawking. He says, Cambridge was my metaphor for England, and it was strange that when I left it, it had become altogether something else, because I had met Stephen Hawking there. It was on a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking. man who is quite disabled now, though he is a worthy successor of Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. And I started, because I had quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestseller ever, lived here. So, as I have told you, the author Firdaus Kanga, he went to England, and for him, Cambridge contained the essence of England. But as he left the place, this has become something entirely different, something which is more meaningful. Why? Because there he became acquainted with the famous Stephen Hawking. And when did he know about this? When he was taking a walking tour through Cambridge, the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking, and he also told him about him. And the author was startled. Why? Because he had quite forgotten. He knew about it, but he had quite forgotten that Stephen Hawking lived here. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and, almost tearing the cord so it could reach me outside, phoned Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India. Perhaps he thought that I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking. Even 10 minutes would do. Half an hour, he said, from 3:30 to 4. So, the author, obviously Kanga, he is rushing to the telephone booth because he was in a hurry. He was so excited, and when he called Hawking's residence, Hawking's assistant received the phone, and Kanga told everything about how he had come from India and he wanted to Stephen Hawking. Here Kanga becomes a little bit humorous when he says that he had informed the assistant that he had come from India in his wheelchair, and he says that probably the assistant was confused and thought that he had traveled in his wheelchair. Probably he had come from wheelchair throughout all the way, and he wanted to fix up an appointment with Hawking, and though he was requesting for only 10 minutes because he was not very hopeful that he will be granted, the assistant fixes up half an hour, which was more than Kanga hoped, and he was very happy because of it. And suddenly I felt weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave, as if you have a courage account on which you are too lazy to draw a check. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. Then you know how much is possible and you reach out farther than you ever thought you could. I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. I've had no choice. Surely, I wanted to say, living creatively with the reality of his disintegrating body was a choice. But I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. There he was, tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him, his long, pale fingers. Every so often, his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sitting opposite him, I could feel his anguish. The mind burnt with thoughts that came out in frozen phrases and sentences as stiff as corpses. So, in the next afternoon, he went to meet Stephen Hawking, and before that, he says that he was at first he was very excited that he got to meet Stephen Hawking, the brilliant minds of our time, but he got weak all over with happiness because he knows that his life will be changing the next afternoon. As Stephen Hawking, he was like a role model to him. Whenever we see any disabled person, people always tell them to be brave. But see, it's very easy for the regular people who do not have any disability to advise someone else who are facing the problems. But actually, the saying is easier than to do it. Okay, so Kanga says he is quite annoyed whenever people tell him to be brave, because being brave is not such an easy choice. You can't be brave like that. It's not a bank account from which whenever you want you can draw a check. But the only thing that works is to see someone disabled like you, and because that becomes a true inspiration, because that person can only understand what the other person is going through. And when he on the next day he's talking to Stephen Hawking about that, Stephen Hawking says that he had not been brave by choice. It's not like he had been brave because he was very courageous, because he was not afraid, but he says that he didn't have any choice. He had a brilliant mind and he had to work, so he could not bend down. But when Stephen Hawking had said that I hadn't been brave but I had no choice, Kanga wanted to reply that obviously the way Stephen Hawking continued with his work is actually a brave act, but he didn't say so because he was feeling very guilty. Kanga, though confined to a wheelchair, can move around or talk as much as he wants. But for Stephen Hawking, it's very hard because he is paralyzed all over. He can't even talk. And the only bit of movement that is left to him is a little bit of his fingers, using which he types on a keypad, and he can't even talk in his own voice. He uses a voice synthesizer, so he like types in a computer keyboard and the computer voice comes out of it. And as we know, it's very hard. Even with fully functional fingers, typing takes a lot of time, and through paralyzed finger, typing and saying things all the time like that is very hard. So talking was an exhausting job for Stephen Hawking, and because of that Kanga felt very guilty for making him talk so much. He can understand that sometimes Stephen Hawking was also getting very frustrated because he is a brilliant mind and obviously he wants to talk and his mind is open with a lot of possibilities. But because of his problem, he cannot speak whatever he wants because that exhausts him. A lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy. I said, I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? About 3 minutes later, he responded, I find it amusing when people patronize me. And do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you in your work? The answer flashed, yes. Then he smiled his one-way smile, and I knew, without being sentimental or silly, that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. So, see, Kanga is asking a simple question, and Stephen Hawking, his answer, when we talk about it, takes a few seconds to say. I find it amusing when people patronize me. 4 or 5 seconds. But it took 3 minutes to type it when Stephen Hawking did it. So you can understand his exhaustion. And what does it mean? What is the meaning of patronizing? So when sometimes people pity him, show him pity as if as if Stephen Hawking's all his achievements are greater just because he is disabled. So that amuses him because a brilliant mind is a brilliant mind whatever their condition is. And the people, when they show pity to them, when they show pity to Stephen Hawking, it is very amusing to him. And Firdaus Kanga, he was actually feeling a little bit of self-conscious, and that is why he asked that if Hawking is irritated with people like him who comes and always seeks interviews with him. Stephen Hawking, in this case, he says yes, but actually after that he is smiling his one-way smile. So one side of his face is paralyzed, but he can smile a one-way smile, and that showed that he is joking. Though he is saying that he is irritated, he is annoyed, he is actually not. And that made Kanga relieved, and he thought that Hawking is one of the most beautiful person. Now see, this is an interesting observation. As we say that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Stephen Hawking, with his paralyzed body, may not be beautiful in classical sense, but beauty is shown through the eyes of the beholder. If the person is dear to you, it doesn't matter how their outward looks is. And here Firdaus Kanga understands that Stephen Hawking has a beautiful mind, and that is why he finds Stephen Hawking to be a beautiful person. A first glimpse of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in the magazine and newspapers have turned three-dimensional. Then you see the head twisted sideways into a slump, the torso shrunk inside the pale blue shirt, the wasted legs. You look at his eyes, which can speak still, and they are saying something huge and urgent. It is hard to tell what, but you are shaken because you have seen something you never thought could be seen. Before you, like a lantern whose walls are worn so thin you can glimpse only the light inside, is the incandescence of a man. The body, almost irrelevant, exists only like a case made of shadows, so that I, no believer in eternal souls, know that this is what each of us is. Anything else is accessory. So, the author here observes Hawking's appearances. He found the first glimpses of Hawking as shocking because his appearance is still as pictures. As he is paralyzed and he cannot move his body even a little bit, it is like his pictures have turned three-dimensional. You can see him in his flesh and body, but he is as still as a picture. There is no movement. But he understood that though Hawking's body was entirely wasted and almost reduced to nothingness, it was entirely titled to one side, but still the eyes of Stephen Hawking caught author's attention. The eyes were still full of life. They wanted to speak, and those speeches were very urgent, but it was very hard to decode that message. When he saw the condition of Hawking, he thought that though Hawking's body is completely wasted, there is an inner glow of personality. As I told you, that Stephen Hawking has a beautiful mind, and that beautiful mind is as if it's emanating a beautiful personality, a glow. And the author is becoming sure that all the bodies of which we pay so much attention, always we think that we take care of our body, which is very important, but actually the body is not everything. And sometimes in those cases even the body is relevant, and the mind is actually the most important thing here. And the author Firdaus Kanga, he is saying that he is not a believer of souls. He doesn't believe the fact that human beings have soul which is eternal, which does not die, like all the religions believe. But when he saw Stephen Hawking, he starts to believe the concreteness of this fact. He thinks that Hawking is actually one of those eternal souls which are very beautiful and who is always present. What do you think is the best thing about being disabled? I asked him earlier. I don't think there is anything good about being disabled. I think I said, you do discover how much kindness there is in the world. Yes, he said. It was a disadvantage of his voice or synthesizer that it could convey no inflection, no shades or tone. And I could not tell how enthusiastically he agreed with me. So, Kanga here, he tries to talk about disability, and he is asking that if there is any good thing, though being disabled is obviously a negative thing, if there is any good effects, good side effect of that. But At first, Stephen Hawking says that no, there is nothing good about being disabled. But Kanga points out that being disabled, someone can be aware of the intensity of kindness in the world. And though Hawking agrees with him, Kanga is not sure that the agreement is a serious one because Hawking talks through a voice synthesizer, a computerized voice, as we have already said. And it is a monotonous voice because, see, whenever we talk not only through our words but our punctuation, our intonation, and body language. So, neither of these things are present in Stephen Hawking, and that makes it very hard to understand that whether there was any enthusiasm or not in his voice, whether he was speaking truthfully or sarcastically. We cannot say it for sure, and Kanga was confused. Every time I shifted in my chair or turned my wrist to watch the time, I wanted to make every one of our 30 minutes count. I felt a huge relief and exhilaration in the possibilities of my body. How little it mattered then that I would never walk or even stand. I told him how he had been an inspiration beyond cliche for me, and surely for others. Did that thought help him? No, he said, and I thought how foolish I was to ask. When your body is claustrophobic room and the walls are growing narrower day by day, it doesn't do much good to know that there are people outside smiling with admiration to see you breathing still. So, what are we seeing here? That the author is continuously he's glancing at his wristwatch because he wants to make every moment, every second count because he knows that he only have this half an hour and he will probably never meet Stephen Hawking again, and so he wants to use every second very judiciously, and that is why he is keeping track of it. And he also thinks that he enjoys a much better condition. Stephen Hawking is so damaged beyond repair, but he can but Firdos Kanga, he can turn his wristwatch, he can talk freely, which Stephen Hawking cannot, and he thinks that he is much free. And thinks that it does not matter that he is disabled in a way that he can never stand or walk, because if someone like Stephen Hawking with ultimate paralyzed condition can achieve so much, Kanga is obviously in a much better way. And he informs Stephen Hawking that he is a great source of inspiration for him and also obviously for many other people. And he wanted to know that if this information that Stephen Hawking is such a great influence on a lot of people, if that helps him in some way, if that makes him feel good. But Hawking directly says no, it doesn't help him at all. And Kanga understands that it is actually a foolish question. It doesn't matter what people think. It actually matters that the body for Stephen Hawking is actually a very uncomfortable one. So, the admiration of people does not make him feel better because he himself is always living in an uncomfortable condition. Is there any advice you can give disabled people? Something that might help make life better? They should concentrate on what they are good at. I think things like disabled Olympics are a waste of time. I know what you mean. I remembered the years I had spent trying to play a Spanish guitar considerably larger than I was, and how gleefully I unstringed it one night. And then the author asking Stephen Hawking for some advice which he would like to give to other disabled people who are not so great as Stephen Hawking, and they might feel influenced, they might feel inspired if this advice comes from someone like Hawking. Hawking says that people should always concentrate what they're good at. They should not try to exceed their capacity. And how st- disabled Olympics, things like that, makes people work harder, work harder with their bodies, and that is actually, in his opinion, a waste of time. The half hour was up. I think I have annoyed you enough, I said, grinning. Thank you for stay. I waited. Have some tea. I can show you the garden. The garden was as big as a park, but Stephen Hawking covered every inch, rumbling along in his motorized wheelchair while I dodged to keep out of the way. We couldn't talk very much. The sun made him silent, the letters on his screen disappearing in the glare. So now here comes an unexpected treat for Kanga. He understands that the half an hour is over and he does not want to interfere in Stephen's life anymore. And he says he thanks Hawking. But unexpectedly, Hawking invites him for tea. He himself says that he will show him the garden. And this pleases Kanga beyond thinking. But as they go out in the garden, it becomes impossible for Stephen to speak much because the sun is making the screen of his computer pad invisible. As you will see, if you go out in the sun and your phone's brightness is not is your phone brightness is very in a very lower condition, you will see that you won't be able to see anything in your phone. And even if the brightness is in high notch, then also sometimes is if the sun is very bright, you won't be able to see anything in your phone. That's what happens in Stephen Hawking's case. The computer pad becomes invisible, and that is why Stephen cannot talk, but they enjoy the time though they're silent. After an hour later, we were ready to leave. I didn't know what to do. I could not kiss him or cry. I touched his shoulder and wheeled out into the summer evening. I looked back and I knew he was waving, though he wasn't. Watching him, an embodiment of my bravest self, the one I was moving towards, the one I had believed in for so many years alone. I knew that my journey was not over for now. So, author, when it was after an hour, the author Kanga had thought about only 10 minutes at first, then he got half an hour with the exemplary mind, and finally it became an hour and a half. For half an hour they talked, and 1 hour they spent together in the garden. But after that it was really time to leave. And the author became so happy and he was so overcome with emotion that he did not know how to behave. Normally when we say goodbye to some beloved person or friend or someone, we hug them or kiss them, but obviously Kanga cannot do it with Stephen Hawking. So he does not know how to behave. He merely touches him a little bit in the shoulder and leaves. When he is going out of the gate, he feels that Stephen Hawking is waving at him as a friend would to say goodbye. But obviously, Stephen Hawking cannot do that. But still, Kanga feels that he is doing so. And he thinks that he is moving towards a better version of himself because he had seen Stephen Hawking, who is the bravest person for him. And this marked his journey in Britain. And he thought that his journey is over for that time. That's all for the chapter. Students, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have also been inspired by this two person. After reading this chapter, I would like some other books. One, you have already heard, Heaven on Wheels, from which this chapter is taken. This chapter is extracted from the original book Heaven on Wheels. You can read it. The other books, there are two famous books by Stephen Hawking, The Theory of Everything and A Brief History of Time. Then there is another book by Stephen Hawking's ex-wife, Jane Hawking. The name of the book is Traveling to Infinity, My Life with Stephen, which shows the growth of Stephen Hawking in a very personal manner. I hope you will enjoy these books. Now, not only books, there are two movies that you can watch. One movie about it you have already heard in the introduction of this chapter, Sixth Happiness, which is based on Stephen Kanga's life, which is based on Firdaus Kanga's life. And the other movie is named The Theory of Everything. It is a biography of Stephen Hawking. This is also a very beautiful movie which shows Stephen Hawking since his adolescence period, when he was a fit person, and his life with Jane Hawking, his college, his adolescent days, and his descent into disability, but still his brilliant achievements. That's all for the chapter, students. I hope you have enjoyed and understood the chapter. That's all for today. Have a good day.